Thanks, David. That was really interesting. I'm from the Institute of Education Sciences, and we, like NIMH, have an intersection with you. We produce far too many kids in our schools who don't succeed and end up in the criminal justice system. And we really focus on improving our outcomes and attainment. My agency is the government and the Department of Education's Agency for Education Statistics, Assessment, Evaluation, and Research. We're probably best known for the nation's report card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, but we have many other large, important programs as well, including a very active grant program to education researchers, and that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. So education researchers often talk about the problem of translation in two different ways. The first is, how do we take basic or exploratory research and move it into interventions or programs? And the second is more like we just heard about, actually translating interventions that are successful in small, limited settings into a larger scale. I'm going to talk mostly about the first problem, and I'm going to give an example from the organization that I just came from a couple of years ago, the Consortium on Chicago School Research, on a study that was just completed that I initiated before I left. It was a study about students and teachers' perceptions of safety inside their schools. And it really did a beautiful job of untangling the many, many factors that influence how kids and teachers feel inside the schools. It looked at student poverty, student race, crime, and social capital in their residential neighborhoods, their incoming achievement levels, the levels of perceived peer support for academic engagement, and it looked at how all of these together combined influence how teachers and students perceive their level of safety in the school. But more importantly, besides looking at these kind of demographic background characteristics, it looked onto, well, what processes within the school building can actually mediate these real external factors, and really learn very nicely about how adult relationships, how teachers work together, and how teachers relate to parents, how much influence it can have in mediating the external. But the question is, the translation is, well, how do we systematically change practices in schools, specifically around how adults relate to each other and work together, in order to ameliorate these external factors that influence school safety? So I think it's a wonderful study. It's really rich data sources, elegant analysis, but now what do we do with it? So one answer that a number of researchers in my field are proposing is that to conduct the research itself so that it's actually designed to bring in these translation stages. In other words, from the beginning, the research is designed so that it won't need translating. Now, there's one example of work that a number of people are engaged in called design-based implementation research. There are related things called like improvement research, formative interventions, social design experiments. But the point is that in these instances, really trying to build in the translation into the research itself. And the work, no matter which of those types that I referred to, kind of have several core principles. They focus on persistent problems of teaching and learning. The researchers have a very strong commitment to an iterative process that's very collaborative, particularly collaborative with practitioners or policymakers, depending on the problem. They have a real concern with developing knowledge and theory through systematic inquiry. And they've also got a focus on building capacity with the people that they're working with, whether, again, they're practitioners or policymakers. So I want to give an example of this type of work that we're supporting at IES, an organization called the Strategic Education Research Partnership. In their words, SERP is the acronym. SERP stimulates innovation in education through sustained collaborations among distinguished researchers, educators, and designers. SERP partnerships expand the capacity for continuous improvement while remaining mindful of what teachers do, how schools operate, and how students learn. So one quick example of their work is a program called Word Generation that's intended to build academic vocabulary in middle school students, which is seen as a real barrier for learning science. They don't have the academic language. So this is a sort of a cross-subject instructional program that was developed with the researchers and the school people, developed and tested collaboratively among researchers and educators. So I want to end saying a little bit more about a couple of specific efforts at IES to address this translation problem, or actually, I would say, to try to avoid the need for the translation, to obviate the problem. So one thing that every opportunity that I have to speak to researchers, which quite a few, I get asked to talk universities all across the country, is I really encourage researchers to conduct research that is really relevant and useful to practitioners and policymakers. So I use this phrase, I say, we can reduce the research to practice problem by increasing the practice to research link. So when practitioners and policymakers have a stake in planning research, there are really double benefits. It's more likely to be useful to them, and they're more likely to take it up because they had a hand in creating it. I also want to encourage more of the partnerships that I mentioned before that SERP, like my former group, the consortium at the University of Chicago, we have a research partnership going on in New York City for New York City Public Schools. The RAND Corporation is heavily involved in Pittsburgh Public Schools. There's a brand new research partnership between the Michigan Department of Education, the University of Michigan, and Michigan State that started from a funded program from our office. We are encouraging these partnerships by putting some incentives into our research requests for proposals. So finally, on a broader scale, IES supports a set of 10 regional education laboratories across the country. We're recompeting them right now, and we are actually requiring these labs to create what we call research alliances that can bring in multiple stakeholders to define a problem and conduct research that will be usable and picked up there. So I want to just conclude that my point really is that we should be designing our research and conducting it up front so that there's less need for translation, and that we can really do this by encouraging more practice-based and collaborative research. Thank you.